First and foremost, how wonderful it is to be here. As my brother Cyril has said, it is always a pleasure to find a packed room of business leaders. It's never difficult to find a packed room of politicians. But to find a room packed with business leaders is a rarity. So hopefully this is a wonderful sign that there is great possibility that can be exploited by both sides to further opportunities that are mutually beneficial to our peoples and our countries. So let me once again, Mr. President, say on my own behalf and on behalf of my official delegation and the business delegation, to thank you and the people of South Africa for the very warm reception that we have received since our arrival here. Some of us yesterday, some of us were here before, and indeed the very fruitful bilateral discussions that we have had over that same period. So it is also with great pleasure to listen to the business leaders from both teams who are speaking to us here. But this special gathering of private but also some public sector players have also concluded a number of agreements that I believe will scale up trade and investment in goods and services between our two countries. We, as President Ramaphosa has said, have also held fruitful bilateral consultations, and we both recognize that whereas our bilateral relations are strong and vibrant, and while we have a shared vision of the region, the continent, the world, we all agree that we could still do more to strengthen our business and commercial relations. So in this regard, and I'm glad to hear that they are already at it, we did task our respective trade ministers to meet, to resolve the non-tariff barrier issues and other constraints that affect trade between our two countries. Further, and noting that trade between our two countries is currently hugely in favor of South Africa, we also agreed to task technical teams to propose measures to address this trade imbalance. And in this context, it is my hope that the technical teams will review a range of goods and services that South Africa imports from the rest of the world and identify those that South Africa could possibly source from Kenya. I am sure you will agree with me that Kenya has comparative advantage in the service sector, particularly in hospitality, financial services, ICT, data processing. And furthermore, given the strategic importance of South Africa and Kenya in the continent, addressing the bottlenecks in the trade and investment regime between our two countries is important towards building and harnessing the full benefits of the AFCTFA. We are already working together to lobby countries across Africa, especially in our respective trading blocs, to ratify the tripartite free trade area. So ladies and gentlemen, through engagements such as what we're having today, we can learn and lead the continent to open the limitless trade and investment opportunities. The AFCFTA offers for 1.3 billion of us on the continent a lot, if we could only pull together. So I encourage you to use this meeting to identify which of the solutions that we are proposing at the bilateral level can be applied more broadly across the continent to unlock the dream of the Africa Free Trade Area. And let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that we are currently at a point in history where our approach can no longer be business as usual. And I would therefore like to challenge you to be bold and forward-looking in your deliberations and to look beyond the agenda of this meeting. Our strategic objective, as my brother has stated, is to create jobs for our youth by spurring faster economic growth in the continent and by creating a cohesive trading bloc in the region in line with the aspirations of the Africa Free Trade Area. I urge all of you to explore not just how to increase volumes of trade and investment between our two countries, but also how to raise its quality and broaden its scope. This includes exploring options for establishing a favored status for youth and small and medium enterprises in trade, driving digital trade also, and harnessing opportunities created by the climate change agenda to scale up green investments. We've all heard that the COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that given the right political and institutional support, you, the private sector, can complement the public sector to create the needed capacity and innovation, not just to conquer the virus, but also to catalyze strong and resilient recovery. And I urge you to use this private sector-led momentum that was unleashed during the pandemic to strengthen partnerships with the public sector to support innovative investment-led recovery. This broad and much more strategic approach to trade should guide your engagements, especially for our ministers, in the upcoming 12th WTO Ministerial Conference in Geneva at the end of this month, to ensure that the meeting focuses on issues that are important and relevant to our continent. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe the opportunities are there. All we need is to go out and grab them, and all you need from us is to create an enabling environment to allow you to take advantage of those opportunities. We are here, together with my brother, to give you that assurance that it is our desire and objective to do everything that we can to facilitate you to do that which you do best. And if you are able to do that which you do best, we are able to create jobs, we are able to grow economies, we are able to feed populations, house them, we are able to create the peace, stability, and security that we need for Africa to prosper. But this you're not going to do alone. You need each other, and you need to support each other. And as I always state, you are not competitors. And I think the big mistake we have made is by making each other competitors. We are not competing. We have yet to satisfy our respective markets. Our problem is that we are not working closer together to meet the demands that our people have. And as I was telling another gathering, you know, these borders, and I also mentioned to my brother, these borders that you create silos for yourselves amongst, you must always remember, are not your creation. These were creations of people outside of this continent who made these borders not to develop you, but to extract from you, Now that you want to develop yourself, we must start looking at these borders, and we must start removing the barriers that we have put, that have defined us in the past, and now hinder us from being the giant that we should be. I was telling my brother this morning the ridiculousness of our borders, that we in Kenya have a border demarcated with, on one side with Tanzania, where the people who live on the border are the Maasai community. They were a nation once upon a time. Now today, they are Kenyans, they are Tanzanians, and yet they are relatives, but they live on two sides of a border. This is not proper. I was telling him of another example. To our west, Lake Victoria, where again another boundary was drawn between Kenya and Uganda. And we're at one particular moment in time, between 2005 and 2007, we had two brothers, same father, same mother. Those who come from polygamous families know what I'm talking about. But this particular one, the same father, same mother. But because their land was stretched across between Kenya and Uganda, one brother inherited land on the Ugandan side, the other brother inherited land on the Kenyan side. And between 2005 and 2007, we had one brother as the vice president of Kenya, and the other brother as the minister in charge of the presidency in Uganda. Now, I don't know whether you can find a much more ridiculous situation to explain the kind of position some of us find ourselves in. So these borders were not made for us. If we are going to become manufacturing giants, we need to do away with these borders. We need to see the African market as one. We need to be able to develop giants like Airbus, that makes components in the United Kingdom, that makes components in France and in other parts of Europe, but has become a global conglomerate. They didn't come together because they loved each other. We all know how they hate each other, we know. Yeah? But they've come together to survive. Africa must come together for us to survive. Survive and indeed prosper. I wish you all the very best. I am very excited that my brother has pushed this agenda of Kenya Airways and South African Airlines, and I am very hopeful that in the very near future, I shall be one of the first customers on a Pan-African flight that is owned by Africa and run by Africans.
We want to see Kenyan coffee, as the minister was saying, Kenyan tea, Kenyan everything that you produce. This is what we want to see. And African hands must make the goods and provide the services that Africans use. We must correct the distorted trade relationships that exist between African countries as well as the rest of the world. We can no longer simply be suppliers of raw materials to the rest of the world and become importers of consumer goods and capital goods. This has to be corrected. Our people want to see a change. As we produce the raw materials, we need to convert them into products, finished products that will be exported to other countries. so that the jobs remain here on this continent instead of creating jobs elsewhere. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area provides an opportunity for our continent to redefine its relationship with the rest of the world and meet the needs of our people for decent work and for decent standards of living. The value of African self-sufficiency was further underlined by the outbreak of COVID-19 early last year, which exposed our vulnerabilities as a continent. When supply chains were disrupted and we were left without critical goods. Left without critical supplies in those first few months, South African government worked with business and other stakeholders to repurpose and expand our industrial capacity to meet the need for medical ventilators, face masks, sanitizers, basic medicines, and later vaccines. As soon as production was up and running, South Africa was able to provide critical medical supplies also on an export basis to a number of other African countries. More than 100 million doses of vaccines have now been produced in South Africa, and there is agreement that the bulk of what is produced here will be targeted specifically for the supply to the rest of the continent. Since those first steps, just 18 months ago, the market value of the COVID-related goods produced is estimated to be about $2 billion. This shows the great potential that exists for collaboration amongst all economic players in pursuit of an urgent and common goal. Trade is built on a bedrock of investment, and we must find ways of attracting more investment into our economies. Crucially, we must encourage African businesses to invest in each other's countries. The African Continental Free Trade Area should be underpinned by strong and ambitious rules of origin that require a high level of value add here on our continent. This is not about taking production away from any African country, but a focus on replacing the large import bill that Africa has with the rest of the world. We need to be proactive in developing a regional industrial vision that recognizes and builds on each country's unique capabilities. The AFCTA is about using the combination of the continent's raw materials and industrial capacity, as well as its finance capacity, to produce quality finished goods for the local and global markets. It is about creating a market large enough to attract investors from across the world to set up their production and facilities on our continent. Now, the vision of African integration is closer than it has ever been. The promise of the ACFTA will only be truly realized through engagements like the one that we are having today. We need governments, investors, entrepreneurs, and business leaders from various African countries to come together like this, like what you've been doing all day today, to explore new partnerships and to reach agreements that drive new trade and investment. And I hope that today, as you've been meeting, you've been able to move from contact to contract, that through your contact, you've crafted a number of contracts, like we saw earlier today with our airlines. It was through a call from President Kenyatta, who called me one afternoon and said in his usual booming voice, "My brother Cyril, I want to talk to you about our airlines And I wondered, what is it that he's wanting to talk to me about? And I said, my brother Uhuru, what is it you want to talk about? He says, no, I want to talk about the tie-up between Kenya Airways and South African Airways. Now that was like a presidential vision that he was putting forward. I'm rather pleased today that we have seen the signing of this agreement, because it is the vision that has emerged from the two countries that is possibly, hopefully, and definitely going to lead to something that both our two countries will be proud about when we set up. By working together, talking together, finding ways of crafting partnerships, and by recognizing the immense potential of our two countries and of our continent, we can build a more inclusive, more resilient, and more prosperous future for all our people. With your visit to our country today, President Kenyatta, I feel much more hopeful about the future of African integration. The warmth that prevails between our two countries, the warmth that I've seen amongst our ministers, the warmth that I'm also sensing here amongst our business people, and the warmth that you and I feel when we are together behoves well for the future of the relations between the two countries. And with that, I truly thank you for being here, and I'm really delighted that this business forum seems to have yielded something much more concrete, as reported by the leaders of our business two organizations. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you for devoting time to talk about our integration. Thank you.
Portuguese colonialism interrupted the trading roles of Mombasa and Malindi and the cities along the East African coastline, and later editions of colonialism locked Africa into a relationship as a supplier of raw materials for manufacturing value add elsewhere in the world. Excellencies, the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA, seeks to change this trajectory and the economic history of our continent. It represents an assertive and impatient Africa that wants to trade with itself, that wants to manufacture, that wants to proudly display made in Africa, grown in Africa, traded between Africans. The Business Forum today seeks to build on this by bringing together resources and people and logistics, and we will hear later, cut flowers.
As mentioned earlier by my colleague minister, a lot of the work that we do as ministers is in pursuant to the vision of our presidents in matters of regional integration. You both led us very well last year as we worked towards the conclusion of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which when fully realized has the capacity to generate more than 390 billion euros of new development in Africa before 2035. So we want to give you the promise that we will continue to work hard at realizing this. Kenya and South Africa have very deep business roots, and we appreciate the investment that has been made by South African companies in Kenya. President Ramaphosa, perhaps I would use this opportunity to signal just one of those investments that has worked very hard to support our SMEs. And I recognize Stanbic Bank and the CEO who is present here. They have partnered a lot and are doing quite a bit with our SMEs. Charles, thank you. Now, we have all heard from the business community their resolutions this morning, and I would like to confirm to the business community that the presidents are very seized of the challenges that you have raised this morning. And I'd like to confirm that they did direct that the ministers for trade meet and resolve in a very, very flexible manner the challenges that have been highlighted. Your Excellencies would like to confirm to you that Minister Patel and myself will not only conclude that within 3 months, but we actually have our first bilateral at about 5:30 this afternoon. So as soon as we finish, we will have our first bilateral. So I want to thank you. Yes, we will do our best to deliver that very, very quickly.
Well, I was being driven from Joburg to Pretoria. It clicked my mind of a saying by one great leader of all times. Nelson Mandela inspires us in the powerful words saying, "It falls on a generation to be great," and we can be that generation. We can be that generation that stood tall when the pandemic attempted to dwarf us. We can be that generation that refuses to be defined by our weaknesses, but opts to be defined by our strength of enterprise. We are the generation that shouts that there is possibility of interdependence for the growth of our two economies. We can be the generation that will truly transform business for our nations.